People often think that a divorce is the end of a chapter, but for me, divorce was the moment the truth finally began to speak. That morning, I walked out of the county courthouse with a few thin sheets of paper in my hand that erased the words husband and wife, yet were about to completely upend a family I once called home. I didn't cry. I didn't cling to the past. My thought process was simple: go back, pack my things, lock the door, and leave. But life rarely lets things end so peacefully. The moment I set foot on the driveway, I was blocked. It wasn't a neighbor, nor a security guard, but my sister-in-law, the person who had always looked at me as a freeloader. She stood squarely in front of the door, looked me up and down, and coldly spat out a sentence that made me freeze. "You are forbidden from stepping foot in my house. Get out." In that exact moment, I realized something. Some families don't break apart because of a divorce. They shatter because of greed, arrogance, and secrets they thought were buried deep. And in that very second, I knew that if I walked away in silence today, I would forever be the pathetic woman kicked out of the very house I had helped build. I looked straight at my sister-in-law and smiled. A smile that carried a secret she was entirely unaware of. In just a few minutes, everything she was desperately clinging to would come crashing down. I had stood in front of the courthouse for a long time after everyone else had dispersed. The midday sun hadn't yet begun to scorch the concrete, yet I couldn't bring myself to take another step. In my hands was the freshly printed divorce decree. The edges were sharp, the ink cold and clear. Just a few short paragraphs, yet they cleanly erased 4 years of marriage. They erased the title of daughter-in-law that I had carried, even though I had never been treated as one for a single day. I didn't cry, not because I was strong, but because I had run out of tears a long time ago. On the day we signed the divorce papers, my ex-husband, Michael, sat across from me, his face as calm as if he were signing a real estate contract. He didn't look at me, he just stared at his pen. When the judge asked if we had anything else to add, he shook his head rapidly, as if afraid that hesitating for a second would drag him back in. "Well, that's done." He said that to me the moment we stepped out of the courtroom. His voice was feather-light. "That's done." A simple phrase, yet it felt like he was ruthlessly shoving me off a cliff. I ordered an Uber back to the house. Along the way, downtown Seattle was as bustling as ever. People were laughing. Traffic was backed up. Coffee shops were open. Life was carrying on as usual. Only my life felt like it had just been snapped in half. My plan was simple: go to the house, grab my clothes, my personal documents, a few things for my child, and leave. I never expected that going home would be the hardest step of my life. The Uber pulled up to the familiar suburban house. The house that, as a newlywed, I had eagerly stepped into with the naive belief that I finally had a real family. The black wrought iron gate, the climbing roses I had planted during my first year of marriage draping over the brick wall. Everything was the same, except there was no place for me anymore. I had just paid the driver and hadn't even rung the doorbell when the front door swung open. It wasn't my ex-husband, nor my mother-in-law. It was Chloe, my sister-in-law. She stood there, arms crossed over her chest, wearing a crisp white blouse and black slacks, her makeup perfectly done as if she were heading to a board meeting. Seeing her blocking the entryway, I understood immediately. She didn't open the door to welcome me. She opened it to barricade me. She looked me up and down, unable to hide the contempt in her eyes. Before I could even say hello, she sneered. "What are you still doing here?" I paused for a beat, not because of the question, but because of her tone, the tone of someone standing on a pedestal, looking down at someone who had just hit rock bottom. "I'm here to get my things," I replied, trying to keep my composure. She let out a dry, mocking laugh that echoed across the empty driveway. "What things? Do you still think you're a part of this family?" She took a step forward, spreading her arms across the doorway, articulating every word sharply. "You are forbidden from stepping foot in my house. Get out." Hearing that, I felt my heart drop, as if someone had pulled a chair out from under me right as I was sitting down. "My house." She said it so smoothly it almost made me laugh. I looked over her shoulder and saw the familiar porch, the patio chair where I used to sit and rock my baby to sleep, my mother-in-law's slippers placed neatly by the step. Everything was still there. But I was not. "Your house?" I asked. My voice quieter than I expected. Chloe tilted her chin up. Whose else? You're divorced. Don't you get it? From now on, you're an outsider, and outsiders need to get lost. Right at that moment, my mother-in-law, Eleanor, walked out from the living room. She looked at me, her eyes icy, void of any surprise or pity. It was as if she had been waiting for this exact scene for a long time. "Why are you back?" she asked, her voice parched. "I came to get my belongings," I replied. Eleanor crossed her arms. "What belongings? The moment you signed those divorce papers, you lost all rights in this house. This house belongs to my son." Chloe stood next to her, smiling triumphantly, as if fueled by her mother's backup. "Did you hear that? What are you still standing there for? You're an eyesore." Standing between the two of them, I realized a painful truth. They didn't see me as a human being. They just saw me as a discarded object. I took a deep breath. In my mind, an image from earlier this morning flashed by. When I was sitting in the escrow office signing a thick stack of papers, the real estate agent had shaken my hand, speaking with enthusiastic warmth. I had been incredibly calm, then so calm that it even surprised me. Chloe continued her sarcastic tirade. "The divorce is finalized, and you're still clinging to this house. Have you no shame?" I looked straight at her. For the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel afraid. I only felt exhausted. "Are you certain this is your house?" I asked, my voice perfectly even. She frowned. "What are you talking about?" I slowly opened my purse and pulled out a large manila envelope. I didn't wave it around or act aggressive. I simply held it in my hand, making sure they could see the official county seal. "I guess you haven't been informed," I said. "Informed about what?" Chloe snapped. I stared right into her eyes, letting every word drop slowly. "I sold this house." The air seemed to freeze solid. Eleanor's eyes went wide. Chloe stood paralyzed, then let out a forced, nervous laugh. "Are you crazy? By what right can you sell this house?" Before I could answer, she snatched the documents from my hand and flipped them open. Her eyes darted rapidly across the pages, and the color began to drain from her face. I knew this was only the beginning. The door they thought they had firmly shut in my face was actually just the first one about to collapse on their heads. The front yard became terrifyingly silent. No more insults, no more arrogant sneers. There was only the sound of the leaves rustling in the midday breeze, and Chloe's rapid, panicked breathing, as her eyes remained glued to the paperwork. She read very fast. So fast that I knew she wasn't reading to comprehend, but reading to find a glimmer of hope, a typo, a misaligned signature, a missing seal, anything that would allow her to scream that I was committing fraud. But the more she read, the paler her face became. "Impossible," she muttered, her voice trembling like someone who had just stepped off a ledge. Eleanor stood beside her, peering over her shoulder, her eyes wide. She might not have understood all the legal jargon, but she understood one thing. An official county recording stamp is never a joke. "Give me that," Chloe suddenly screamed, yanking the papers away and turning to her mother. "Mom, don't believe her. It's a scam. How could she possibly have the right to sell this house?" Eleanor turned to me, her eyes beginning to waver. It was no longer the confident gaze of someone who had just told me to get out. It was the gaze of someone realizing they might be standing on a landmine. "Tell me," she demanded, her voice dropping. "By what right did you sell this house?" I stood there, my hand still gripping the strap of my purse. My heart wasn't pounding like I thought it would be. Perhaps it was because I had been preparing for this moment for far too long. I looked at them, two people who had treated me like garbage, and for the first time in my life, they looked incredibly small to me. "I didn't take anyone else's rights," I said slowly. "I simply exercised my own." Chloe scoffed, but the sound was brittle, like shattering glass. "Is your name on the deed? Do you think I'm stupid?" I didn't answer immediately. I opened my purse and pulled out an older folder, its edges frayed. I held it up in front of them. "This," I said, "is the original grant deed." Eleanor took it with trembling hands. She flipped through the pages, her eyes stopping for a long time on the line where my name was clearly printed. I remembered the day those papers were signed vividly. That day, Michael, my husband, had said a sentence I still remember word for word. Just put it in your name for convenience. It's for both of us in the future anyway. Back then, I naively believed that for both of us meant cherishing it together. I didn't expect that in their minds. For both of us actually meant theirs. Impossible. Eleanor shook her head. My son put the down payment on this house. I nodded. Yes. A portion of the down payment was his. Then, I looked straight at her. But the rest of it was my money. The money from my job, the loans I took out, the mortgage I paid every single month. And most importantly, I am the sole name on the title. Chloe lunged forward, snatching the papers back from her mother. You're lying. If that's true, why didn't you ever say a word? Why did you let my brother and my mother make all the decisions? I laughed. Not a laugh of contempt, but a laugh at my own past stupidity. Because back then, I actually thought we were a family. Because when you're family, you don't keep score, I replied. That sentence made Eleanor freeze, while Chloe's face turned beet red. You talk a big game, she gritted her teeth. But even if your name is on it, you can't sell it without my brother's signature. I shook my head. I don't need it. Her eyes bulged. What are you talking about? I took a deep breath. This was the moment I knew the truth would pierce right through their inflated egos, because this is legally my sole and separate property. Michael only contributed funds. He was not on the title. And in the postnuptial agreement he signed, he explicitly waived his rights to it. The air turned to ice. Chloe took a step back. Eleanor grabbed the gate as if she were about to faint. No, impossible, she mumbled. He's not that stupid. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to kick them while they were down. The truth was heavy enough on its own. Suddenly, Chloe shrieked like a banshee, losing everything. Even if you sold it, so what? We are living here. You can't just evict us. I looked at her calmly. I'm not evicting you. I pointed toward the street. The new owners will handle that. She stood paralyzed. I checked my watch. Escrow closes in 3 days. Eleanor's face went ashen. 3 days? Yes, I replied. 3 days to pack your things. Chloe lunged at me, practically sobbing. You're pure evil. Do you want to throw us out on the street? I stared at her for a long time. In my mind, flashes of the nights I sat crying in my room holding my baby, being called a leech, ungrateful, and unworthy of stepping into this family, replayed themselves. You're right, I said slowly. I used to be very soft-hearted. I looked directly into her eyes. But today, I am simply taking back what belongs to me. Suddenly, the heavy front door swung open, and familiar footsteps echoed on the porch. Michael, my ex-husband, appeared. He stood there, taking in the scene before him, then looked at the documents in his sister's hand. His face drained of color. What's going on? He asked, his voice unsteady. Chloe ran to him, grabbing his arm. Michael, she sold the house. She wants to throw Mom and me out on the street. Michael turned to me, his eyes full of panic. Elena, what are you doing? I looked at him, the man who was once my husband, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of his gaze anymore. I'm doing exactly what I told the judge I would do, I replied. I'm ending things. Michael took a step forward, lowering his voice. Elena, don't take this too far. Let's talk this over. I shook my head. You said we were done, Michael. Today. He fell silent. Chloe was trembling. Eleanor began to cry a belated, pathetic cry that no longer softened my heart. And in that moment, I knew this house was no longer going to be a battlefield. The real war was about to shift to a different location. Because I hadn't yet told them the more important news. The news about the company and the CEO chair that my sister-in-law was currently sitting in. I drove away from that house as the late afternoon sun began to set. No one saw me off. No one tried to hold me back. The wrought iron gate closing behind me felt heavier than when it opened. But this time, I didn't feel like I was being kicked out. I felt like I had walked out on my own terms. Driving down the road, I realized my hands were shaking. Not from fear, but because the emotions I had suppressed for so long had finally found a way out. Sitting in my car, looking at the busy traffic, a very clear thought emerged in my mind. They won't stop here. Chloe was not the type to accept defeat over a few pieces of paper. She was used to standing above others, issuing orders, and showing contempt. And the only thing she still had to cling to right now was the family company. I guessed right. Less than 2 hours later, my phone vibrated constantly. Texts, calls, all from familiar numbers at the company. Some were checking in, some were probing, and some just sent a short warning. Brace yourself, Elena. I smiled. I had braced myself a long time ago. The next morning, I walked into the downtown Seattle corporate building where I had worked since its founding days long before I became Michael's wife. I wasn't dressed overly fancy, just in sharp, professional business attire, my hair tied back, my expression calm. But I could clearly feel the eyes darting toward me. People whispered. Some averted their gaze. Others looked at me with burning curiosity. I knew the story of the sister-in-law selling the house had spread faster than I anticipated. As I walked into the lobby, the elevator doors chimed open, and Chloe stepped out. She was walking briskly, her heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor, her face tense but still trying to maintain her usual arrogant air. Seeing me, she froze for a split second before a cold smile spread across her face. "You actually have the nerve to show your face here?" she asked, loud enough for the nearby employees to hear. I looked right at her. "This is the company. I'm here to work." She scoffed. "Work? Have you forgotten? You're divorced. You are absolutely nothing here anymore." She turned to the employees. "Everyone, get back to work. Don't let outsiders cause a scene." She said the word outsider very loudly, purposely trying to humiliate me in front of the staff. I didn't react. I simply kept walking toward the elevator. As the doors were closing, I heard her call out, her voice dripping with challenge. "Just remember, I am the CEO here." The elevator doors slid shut. I looked at my reflection in the polished stainless steel and chuckled. I wasn't laughing at her. I was laughing at myself for ever thinking that power was something so intimidating, when in reality, it was far more fragile than I thought. Reaching the executive floor, the atmosphere was completely different. Several department heads looked at me with hesitation. One approached and lowered his voice. "Elena, what brings you here today?" "I'm here for the board meeting," I replied. He hesitated. "Which meeting?" "I am a majority shareholder," I said smoothly. "I have the right to be here." The man froze. Less than 10 minutes later, Chloe walked into the boardroom. She wore a tailored suit, carrying a stack of files, acting as if nothing was wrong. She shot me a glare, then sat in the chairman's seat, tapping her pen lightly on the table. "Let's begin," she said. I sat quietly and observed. I let her speak. I let her ramble on about revenue, projections, and strategies, things I knew intimately because the vast majority of it was the foundation Michael and I had built together. Finally, she looked toward me. "Does Elena have any input?" Her tone couldn't hide her sarcasm. I looked up. "I do." The entire room went silent. "I would like to ask," I spoke slowly, "since when does the CEO have the authority to unilaterally sign contracts exceeding the spending limit without board approval?" Chloe froze for a fraction of a second. She quickly regained her composure. "That falls under my executive authority." I nodded. "And what about the corporate funds withdrawn as advances to individual partners? How do you explain those?" The air in the room grew heavy. Chloe slammed her pen down on the table. "You are slandering me." I shook my head, pulling a folder from my briefcase. "I'm not slandering anyone. I'm simply reading the financials." A few board members started looking at Chloe differently. Realizing this, she shot up from her chair. "This meeting is over. Elena has no authority to be here." I remained seated. "You are mistaken," I said, my voice steady. "My authority does not come from a marriage that has ended. My authority comes from my equity." Chloe snapped her head toward me, her face red. "Don't use your shares to threaten me. I am the CEO appointed by Michael." I smiled. This was the moment I knew she was about to say the exact thing that would break her. "You're right," I replied. I placed the folder on the table and pushed it gently toward her. "You were appointed, and you can also be fired." A low murmur swept through the room. Chloe let out a loud, strained laugh. "Who do you think you are to sign off on my termination?" I looked her dead in the eye, dropping every word with precision. "The person with the controlling voting rights." Chloe stood paralyzed. I knew her mind was racing in chaos. Impossible. Not yet. Not now. But I also knew something else. The chair she was sitting in had already begun to tip over. The meeting adjourned in a stiflingly heavy atmosphere. Chloe walked out first, refusing to look at anyone. I stayed behind to gather my documents. A department head approached me and whispered, "If you need anything, we will cooperate." I nodded. I don't need a loud alliance. I just need the truth on my side. When I walked out of the corporate building, a sudden downpour had started. A Seattle autumn rain, not torrential, but enough to slick the streets and wash away the oppressive tension of the past few days. I stood under the awning, watching the rain, my mind incredibly clear. The hardest part wasn't overturning the past. It was finding the courage to face it head-on. That afternoon, a strange, heavy atmosphere settled over the entire company. No one spoke of it openly, but everyone could feel something massive, shifting beneath the surface. The typing grew quieter. Conversations in the break room abruptly stopped whenever someone walked in. All eyes were subtly drawn to the grand boardroom at the end of the hall, where everyone knew a storm was about to break. I sat inside the boardroom, a thick stack of files in front of me. Every piece of paper in that folder wasn't prepared overnight. It was the culmination of months of observation, sleepless nights, and moments where I questioned if any of this was worth it. The door swung open. Chloe marched in, completely stripped of her morning arrogance. Her steps were frantic, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. Behind her was Michael, my ex-husband, his face tight, his tie loosened and crooked, looking like he had sprinted all the way here. "What is the meaning of this meeting?" Michael demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. Before I could answer, Chloe rushed to the conference table. "Michael, say something. She's trying to tear our company apart." I looked up at them. For the first time since the divorce, I saw Michael genuinely flustered. Not emotionally flustered over our relationship, but panicked because power was slipping through his fingers. "Sit down," I said. "Company business is handled in the company." Chloe glared at me. "By what right are you giving orders?" I didn't reply. I simply slid the thick folder toward her. "By the right of the majority shareholder." The room was dead silent. Michael stepped forward, picked up a page from the folder, scanned a few lines, and his head snapped up. "Elena, where did you get these?" "From accounting," I replied. "From the bank records. And from the company's own email servers." Chloe let out a loud, distorted laugh. "Don't believe her, Michael. She's making it up. Everything I did was for the company." I flipped to another page and placed it right in front of her. "Withdrew cash advances 3 times in 2 months, wired to a personal offshore account. No invoices, no board approval." Chloe turned to stone. Michael looked at his sister, his voice rising in anger. "Chloe, what are these transfers?" I just borrowed it temporarily," she stammered. "I'm the CEO, I have the authority." I spoke slowly. "The CEO does not have the authority to embezzle corporate funds for personal use." I paused for a beat before continuing. "And due to severe violations of financial regulations, I am proposing a board resolution to terminate Chloe's position as CEO, effective immediately." The moment those words left my mouth, Chloe screamed, "Shut up!" She lunged forward, slamming her hands on the table. "Michael, you appointed me. Without your permission, no one can fire me." Michael stood in the middle of the room, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked at me, then at the folder, then at his sister. Finally, he lowered his voice. "Elena, let me handle this. Please don't blow this out of proportion." I stared at him for a long time. "Michael," I said slowly, "did you finish handling your family business?" He fell silent. "You told me not to bother your family," I continued. "But this is a corporation. I am not blowing things out of proportion. I am doing things by the book." Chloe was shaking. "You just want revenge, don't you?" I shook my head. "If I wanted revenge, you wouldn't even be sitting here arguing with me right now." I pushed my chair back, stood up, and took a pen from my briefcase. It wasn't an expensive pen. but it felt incredibly heavy as I pressed it against the final page of the document. Board resolution for termination for cause. I read aloud, clearly, pursuant to the corporate bylaws and shareholder voting rights. Chloe lunged to stop me. Michael also stepped forward quickly. Elena, wait. I looked at them, then down at my signature that was ready to be inked. Michael, I said, my voice completely serene. There are things that, if I don't sign today, will only result in total ruin tomorrow. And I signed. My hand didn't shake. No hesitation. Just a clean, decisive stroke of the pen. Chloe shrieked as if the air had been sucked from her lungs. No, no, no. She collapsed into a chair, her eyes wide, staring at the termination document like it was a death sentence. Michael stood paralyzed. The room sank into a silence so heavy that the hum of the HVAC system overhead sounded deafening. I set my pen down and gathered my papers. Human Resources will process your exit today, I said, looking at Chloe. Hand over everything and avoid making this worse for yourself. She looked up, her eyes filled with venom. Do you think you've won? I shook my head. I didn't win. I just ended it. As I walked out of the boardroom, I heard Michael call my name from behind. I didn't turn around. I knew that if I looked back, I would only see a man I had once trusted, and I had no desire to be disappointed yet again. Out in the hallway, several employees stood pressed against the walls. Some nodded respectfully to me, some looked at me with awe and a hint of fear. But I didn't feel superior to anyone. I just felt lighter. Because I knew that from this moment on, the rules of the game had changed, and the financial secrets Chloe had tried so hard to bury were only just beginning to surface. I left the corporate plaza after dark. The streetlights flickered on and rose, casting amber glows onto the rain-slicked Seattle pavement, reflecting long, fractured streaks of light that mirrored exactly how I felt inside. I had thought I would feel relieved after signing that resolution, but no, sometimes making the right decision is still utterly exhausting. My phone vibrated. It was Michael. I stared at the screen for a long time until it stopped ringing. Then it vibrated again. And on the third time, I finally answered. Elena. His voice was hoarse. Where are you? I'm home, I replied curtly. I need to see you. He sounded like a man desperately grasping at something slipping through his fingers. We have nothing left to talk about, I said, preparing to hang up. It's not about the company, Michael rushed out. It's my mom. My hand froze. What about her? I asked. Michael inhaled sharply. She's in the hospital. I closed my eyes. An image of the woman who had stood on the porch that afternoon, arms crossed, coldly kicking me out, flashed through my mind. I didn't feel vindictive. I just felt incredibly empty. Why was she admitted? I asked. Michael was silent for a few seconds before speaking softly. She collapsed. Blood pressure dropped. The doctors said it was acute psychological shock. I didn't ask further. I hung up the phone. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the traffic outside grow sparse. A single question looped in my mind. How far had this really gone? The next morning, I received an email from the accounting department. The subject line simply read, Urgent, audit report regarding Chloe. I opened it. The numbers that populated the screen made me sit up straight. Not because they were massive, but because there were so many of them. Small, fractured withdrawals, scattered over months. The funds didn't travel directly. They bounced through several shell accounts before finally pooling in one familiar place. An account under my mother-in-law's name. I sat completely frozen. It wasn't just Chloe. The woman who had berated me for freeloading had been using company funds to plug the massive holes in her own personal debts. I picked up my phone and called the head of accounting. Who authorized these transfers? I asked. The person on the other end hesitated. Initially, it was Chloe, but later there were verbal directives from Michael. I let out a bitter laugh. Everything was starting to connect. The times I was told the household budget was tight, the times I was told the company was struggling, the times I dipped into my own savings to cover family expenses. It wasn't because there was a lack of money. It was because the money was being funneled elsewhere. At noon, Michael called again. Elena. His voice was shaking. Do you know about the wire transfers? I remained silent. Accounting called me, he continued. They said they might have to report this to the Financial Crimes Division. I closed my eyes. Are you scared? I asked. He choked. I didn't think it would get this severe. You didn't think, or you didn't want to think, I asked back. Michael sighed, his voice completely drained. Elena, my mom is in the hospital. Chloe is having a breakdown. Please, don't push this any further. I laughed, but there was no joy in it. Michael, I'm not pushing anything. I stopped. But if this gets out, he interrupted frantically, my family will be destroyed. I replied very slowly. Your family isn't being destroyed because I signed a piece of paper. Your family is being destroyed because you let everyone treat corporate funds like a personal piggy bank. The line went dead silent. That afternoon, I went to the hospital, not out of obligation, but because I wanted to look truth in the eye one last time. Eleanor lay on the hospital bed, her face much more gaunt than before. Chloe sat beside her, her eyes swollen and red. The moment she saw me, she jumped up, practically screaming. What are you doing here? Haven't you done enough? I stood still. Eleanor turned her head. When she saw me, her eyes lacked their usual sharpness. There was only exhaustion and fear. You, she rasped weakly. Are you trying to drive our family into a corner? I stepped closer and said quietly, I'm not driving anyone into a corner. I'm just refusing to carry your burdens anymore. Chloe burst into tears. If we didn't use that money, how was Mom supposed to pay her debts? How were we supposed to live? I looked at her. You embezzled company funds to pay off personal debts. Did you even consider the consequences? She went mute. Michael stood at the back of the room, his head bowed. I knew he was finally understanding, but it was far too late. I won't cover for you, I said, my voice incredibly clear. But I didn't rub salt in the wound either. Eleanor turned her face away, tears streaming down her cheeks. So you don't consider me your mother anymore. I stood there for a long time before replying, I used to. But I've paid my dues in full. I turned and walked out of the hospital room. The hallway was long and stark white. My footsteps echoed evenly, not fast, not slow. This time, I knew for absolute certain. What was coming next would not be arguments. It would be consequences. And I was not the one who needed to be afraid. That morning, I was sitting in my office when I received a call from an unknown number. The man on the other end spoke with a clear, authoritative, and direct tone. We are detectives with the Financial Crimes Division. We need to speak with you regarding certain financial irregularities at your company. I wasn't surprised. I simply offered a soft, yes, sir. Hanging up, I sat quietly for a long time. Outside the glass window, the sun beat down on the parking lot, glaringly bright. I realized that when the truth is finally laid out on the table, the light always comes very fast. The meeting took place that very day. 2 detectives walked into the conference room. They weren't overly intimidating, nor did they try to be menacing, but their absolute calm made the atmosphere heavier than any aggressive interrogation could. We've received a report regarding the misappropriation of corporate funds, one of them said. As a majority shareholder, we need to verify some facts with you. I nodded and pushed the meticulously prepared folder across the table toward them. Everything is in here, I said. Bank statements, accounting ledgers, email directives, and wire transfer logs. They flipped through the pages very slowly. No one spoke. There was only the rustling of paper and the steady scratching of a pen taking notes. About 10 minutes later, one of the detectives looked up. These transfers are directly linked to Chloe and several members of your family. Yes, I replied. And there were indirect verbal directives from Michael. The air in the room felt compressed. That same afternoon, I learned that Michael had been brought in for questioning. That evening, he called me. His voice had lost all the composure he had maintained in previous conversations. They asked extremely detailed questions, he said. They have everything. Did you tell them the truth, Michael? I asked. He was silent, then whispered. I didn't think it was this serious. I closed my eyes. Because you thought the money belonged to your family. Michael sighed heavily, his voice laden with exhaustion. I was wrong. It was the first time I had ever heard him say that sentence. But strangely, it no longer brought me any sense of relief. Meanwhile, Chloe had completely collapsed. She stopped coming to the company, her phone was turned off. Eleanor was discharged from the hospital earlier than expected, but went home and locked the doors tight. The house that was once so loud, the house that had kicked me out with such vicious words, was now drowning in a terrifying silence. 3 days passed in a blur. On the exact day the new buyers arrived for the final walkthrough to take possession of the house, I stood from a distance and watched them move in. No gloating, no pain, just a very clear sense of finality. A chapter had closed. That evening, Michael came to find me. He stood outside my apartment door for a long time before finally finding the courage to ring the bell. When I opened the door, he kept his head down, unable to look me in the eye. "I'm not here to ask to get back together," he said immediately. "I just want to apologize." I stood still. "I let things go too far," he continued. "I thought that if I just closed my eyes and ignored it, it would all blow over. I thought you would always just endure it." I looked at him, the man who was once my husband, and for the first time, I saw how truly small he was. "What are you apologizing for?" I asked. "For losing the house? For losing your position? Or for losing me?" He choked. It took him a long time to answer. "For all of it." I shook my head slightly. "I'm sorry, it's too late." I didn't slam the door. I just said one very clear sentence. There are certain lines that, once crossed, you can never come back from. Michael walked away in silence. A few days later, the Financial Crimes Division officially announced the opening of a formal investigation. It wasn't a media spectacle, but it was enough to cause the people who once thought they were untouchable to experience true sleepless nights. Chloe was subpoenaed. Eleanor was ordered to provide statements. Michael was placed on a restricted travel list. As for me, I was no longer the person being asked why I had blown things out of proportion. I became the cooperating witness. One evening, I sat alone in my new apartment. It wasn't large, it wasn't luxurious, but it was peaceful. I brewed a cup of tea and sat by the window, listening to the rain patter against the glass. For the first time in many years, I didn't feel backed into a corner. I understood a very clear truth. Fairness doesn't come from enduring. It comes from having the courage to walk away at the right time. And I knew that in the coming days, as everything was dragged out into the light, I wouldn't be the one forced to explain myself. They would. I knew Chloe wouldn't just sit idly by waiting for the results of the investigation. People like her, as long as they have breath left in their lungs, will try to drag others down with them. I just didn't expect her counterattack to be so swift and so shameless. That morning, as soon as I arrived at the office, my phone was flooded with messages not from Chloe, but from old acquaintances. "Have you seen the news? Look at Facebook, LinkedIn. Be careful, Elena. They're pinning it all on you." I opened my phone. A lengthy, anonymous post was circulating on a local business networking forum. It didn't name the company, but anyone in the industry could easily connect the dots. The narrative centered around a divorced woman abusing her position as a majority shareholder to drive her ex-husband's family to the brink of ruin. And one specific line made me let out a bitter laugh. Every financial decision was manipulated by this person. I turned off my screen. I wasn't angry, and I wasn't surprised. I knew this was just the opening act of her playing the victim. That same afternoon, the financial crimes detectives called me in for another meeting. This time, Chloe was present. She sat across from me, her face gaunt, her hair unkempt, a stark contrast to her usual polished appearance. But her eyes were still sharp, the eyes of someone desperately clinging to the last shred of power. "You see?" she sneered, her voice shaking but defiant. "What was the point of blowing this up? Now the company is in chaos, and the family is destroyed." I looked at her calmly. "Are you finished?" She turned to the detectives, her voice choking with forced tears. "I was just following orders. I wasn't the final decision maker." "Whose orders?" a detective asked. Chloe pointed straight at me. "I was following Elena's instructions. She's the majority shareholder." Every withdrawal had her implicit approval. The air in the room grew heavy. I didn't rush to defend myself. I simply unzipped my briefcase and pulled out another folder. Not new, not thick, but sufficient to end the blame game. These are the emails containing the wire transfer directives, I said. Dates, contents, all sent from Chloe's personal and corporate email accounts. My name is nowhere on these. I slid the folder toward the detectives. Chloe's face went white. I was just doing what Michael told me to do. She frantically pivoted, her voice rising. He told me to take care of the family first. Michael was also present in the room. His head snapped up, his eyes bloodshot. Chloe, what the hell are you saying? Chloe turned to him, screaming. Are you going to deny it? You told me to withdraw the money so Mom could pay off her debts. You said the company belonged to our family. The room fell dead silent. I looked at Michael. For the first time, I saw him with absolutely nowhere left to hide. He couldn't blame me, and he couldn't stay silent anymore. Did you instruct her to do this? The detective asked. Michael lowered his head. It took him a very long time to answer. Yes, just one word, but it carried an immense weight. Chloe let out a loud, distorted laugh. See? It wasn't just me. I looked at her. You just confessed to everything. She froze. You embezzled the funds. I continued. You signed the transfer orders. You covered the tracks. Who you did it for doesn't change the fact that you committed a crime. Chloe shook with rage. You think your hands are clean? You sold the house and threw my mother out on the street. I replied in an even tone. I sold my house. And your mother was only living there because you convinced her it was your house. One of the detectives was taking notes rapidly. Chloe spun toward Eleanor, who was sitting in the corner of the room, and cried out, Mom, say something. Tell them I didn't do this alone. Eleanor looked up. Her face was crumpled in terror. For the first time, I saw that she had absolutely no one left to lean on. She looked at me, then at Chloe, then at Michael. Enough, she rasped, her voice frail. Enough, Chloe screamed. Mom, you can't stay quiet. I said enough. Eleanor cut her off. Things have already gone this far. Who else is there to blame? Chloe sat paralyzed. The room sank into silence. I felt no triumph. I only saw a very clear, ugly truth. When power is stripped away, family loyalty crumbles with it. The meeting concluded. Chloe was informed that she was required to continue cooperating with the investigation. Michael went home with an ashen face. Eleanor had to be physically supported as she walked. As I stepped out into the hallway, Chloe called after me. Do you think you've won? I turned and looked at her for a long time. I didn't win. I just stopped losing. She let out a dry, hollow laugh. You think you're safe? This isn't over. I nodded. I know, and I truly did know. Because when a person is willing to throw their entire family under the bus to save themselves, their next move will be even worse. After that meeting, Chloe vanished from all the places that used to be her stage. She didn't show up at the company. She dodged calls from the investigators. But she wasn't silent. She just chose a different platform to project her voice. The next morning, when I opened my phone, social media was flooded with long, rambling posts written in a shaky, tear-soaked tone. Does anyone understand what it feels like to be pushed into a corner by your own sister-in-law? I was just a younger sister trying to help my family. And now I'm being painted as a criminal. A divorced woman, driven by personal vendettas, is willing to trample on all morals. She didn't mention my name, but every word was a targeted strike. Old friends of hers left comforting comments, distant acquaintances shared the post, and some people even messaged me privately. Their tone was a mix of pity and reproach. What did you do to make her suffer like that? She's family, after all. Why take it this far? I read them and locked my phone. I was far too used to this tactic of using tears to cover up crimes. That afternoon, I was summoned for questioning again. This time, Chloe arrived very early. She wore simple clothes, no designer suits, no heavy makeup. Her eyes had dark circles, her lips were pale. If someone didn't know the full story, they would absolutely believe she was the victim. When she saw me walk in, she lowered her head. I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling. The entire room paused. I looked at her and said nothing. I've thought about this a lot, she continued. I just wanted my family to be at peace. I never expected things to go this far. A detective asked, then how do you explain the embezzled funds? Chloe took a deep breath, letting a tear fall. I didn't mean to steal. I was just holding it for safekeeping, because my mother was drowning in debt, because my brother was under so much pressure. I wasn't strong enough to say no. She turned to me, her eyes pleading. Elena, can you please put in a good word for me? I'm not a bad person. I heard her clearly, and I understood perfectly. This was her final card. The I'm weak, I'm pitiful card. I slowly spoke up. Are you finished? Chloe froze. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a small USB flash drive. I placed it on the table. This is an audio recording, I said. A conversation between you and the head of accounting, instructing them to delete the transaction logs. The air in the room turned to stone. Chloe stammered, You wiretapped me? I shook my head. Did you forget? You made that call on a company VoIP line. The system automatically records and archives them. I looked directly into her eyes. Weak people don't try to systematically cover their tracks. The tears on Chloe's face seemed to instantly freeze. The detective continued. And what about the dissemination of false information online? Chloe kept her head down and didn't answer. I'll answer for her, I said. It was a last-ditch effort to sway the court of public opinion. Chloe's head snapped up. Shut up, she screamed. Do you know what it feels like to be backed into a corner? I replied, my voice completely flat. I do. Because I lived in that corner for years. That sentence silenced her. The meeting ended in dead quiet. No more crying, no more acting. As we stepped outside, Chloe stopped me. Her voice was no longer trembling. It was ice cold. You think your hands are clean? She asked. You think you've done nothing wrong? I turned back. I might have been wrong to trust people, but I am not wrong for putting a stop to it. She smirked. You'll regret this. I looked at her for a very long time. No. The only people who regret things are the ones who know they did wrong but still try to deny it. Chloe turned and walked away. That night, I received a text from an unknown number. Just one short line. You think you won? This game isn't over. I looked at the screen, then turned off my phone. I knew Chloe hadn't given up yet, but I also knew something else, clearer than ever before. When a person runs out of tears, out of victims to play, and out of people to blame, all they are left with is the naked, ugly truth. I received the formal subpoena on a very quiet morning. No chaos, no incessant ringing of the phone, just a white envelope placed neatly on my desk. The edges were crisp, the font cold and clear. I picked it up and read it slowly line by line. I felt no fear, only a very distinct sensation. We had reached the point of no return. That same day, Chloe received her subpoena. Unlike me, she reacted violently. I heard later that she threw a massive fit at the house she was staying in, ripping up the papers and screaming nonstop. They're bullying me. No one understands what I'm going through. But this time, no one stepped in to comfort her. Eleanor remained silent. Michael was actively avoiding going home. The deposition took place at the district attorney's office. A large room with high ceilings and glaring fluorescent lights that made everything look brutally clear. There was no room for vague emotions here, only questions and answers. I sat on one side, Chloe sat opposite me. This time she didn't look at me, she kept her head down, her fingers intertwined tightly, her nails digging deep into her skin. A prosecutor placed a thick stack of files on the table. We have concluded cross-referencing the bank statements, emails, audio recordings, and witness testimonies, he stated. The preliminary conclusion indicates evidence of corporate malfeasance, misappropriation of assets, and tampering with evidence. Chloe shot up. I didn't steal. She's the one who withdrew the funds. But you executed the transfers, the prosecutor continued, and utilized them for personal enrichment. Chloe turned to me, her voice almost begging. Elena, say something. You know I'm not that evil. I looked at her for a long time. You aren't evil, I said. You're just used to thinking you'd never have to pay the price. The room fell silent. Michael was called in. He walked in looking haggard. Deep bags under his eyes, his shoulders slumped. He was no longer the man who had stood at the front gate, coldly telling me not to bother his family. Do you confirm the directives regarding the flow of these funds? the prosecutor asked. Michael remained silent, then nodded. Yes. Just one word. But this time, it couldn't save anyone. Chloe burst into hysterical sobs. You ruined me. Michael kept his head bowed and didn't reply. The prosecutor took notes and continued. As a co-conspirator, Michael, you will be required to cooperate further to clarify your degree of liability. I sat there listening to every word. Inside, I didn't feel happy or sad. It just felt like watching a house slowly collapse, a house I had moved out of a long time ago. At the end of the meeting, Chloe was informed she was a flight risk and was barred from leaving the state. Her passport was flagged. She stood there, paralyzed. Out in the hallway, Chloe blocked my path. Her eyes were bloodshot, her voice hoarse. Are you satisfied now? I looked at her calmly. No. Then why did you push it this far? She screamed. Couldn't you leave me one way out? I answered very slowly. You had a way out. You just chose not to take it. She froze. Right from the beginning, I continued. You could have stopped. You could have said no. You could have chosen not to take what didn't belong to you. Chloe let out a twisted, broken laugh. You're always so right, aren't you? I shook my head. I've been wrong about a lot of things, but I take responsibility for my mistakes. She fell silent. Michael stood a short distance away. He looked at me, his eyes full of remorse. Elena, he called out. I didn't turn around. Because I knew that from this moment on, no apology possessed the power to fix anything. I got home very late that night. I sat alone in the living room, leaving all the lights off, letting only the streetlights filter in. I thought about the years I had spent trying to endure, wondering where I had gone wrong. Now I knew. My mistake was thinking that silence would preserve a family. I stood up and opened the window. The night breeze blew in, cool and refreshing. Somewhere out there, Chloe was losing sleep. Michael was terrified. Eleanor was waiting for an ending she had never imagined. And as for me, for the first time in my life, I no longer had to wait for anyone to judge me. After that meeting, no one called me to argue anymore. No one screamed blame at me. No one played the victim on social media. They all seemed to retreat from the light simultaneously, leaving the consequences to find them on their own. I heard news about that family through the grapevine. I heard that the old house was now completely empty. I heard that Eleanor had moved into a small spare room at a distant relative's house, slipping in and out quietly, as if terrified of being a burden. I heard that Michael had taken an indefinite leave of absence, not because he was forced to, but because he no longer had the face to sit at the boardroom table. As for Chloe, no one mentioned her anymore. A person who used to be everywhere, who used to command boardrooms, who used to issue orders and point fingers, suddenly vanished from all conversations. Not because people pitied her, but because they no longer knew how to look at her. I didn't ask, nor did I seek out more information. I began to return to my own life, a much simpler life. I dropped my child off at school in the mornings, came home from work on time in the afternoons, cooked dinner in the evenings, read books, and sometimes just sat still, watching the clock tick. There were nights I suddenly remembered the time I spent living in that house, the crowded but freezing family dinners, the seemingly careless remarks that cut incredibly deep, the times I told myself, just endure it a little longer. Looking back now, I realized I had endured it for far too long. One afternoon, Michael came to see me. Unannounced, no phone call. He stood in front of my door for a long time. When I opened it, he kept his head down, holding a small paper bag. I'm just dropping by for a second, he said. I won't bother you for long. I silently opened the door wider to let him in. Standing in my small living room, he hesitated like a stranger who had walked into the wrong house. I brought these back to you. He placed the paper bag on the table, things I was still holding onto. I opened it. It contained some old documents, a watch, and a notebook I had been searching for but could never find. I looked at him. I didn't ask why he brought them now. I'm sorry, he said very softly. Not for what had just happened, but for letting me carry so much weight all alone. I looked at him. I felt no anger and no lingering affection. What are you apologizing for? I asked. For staying silent? Or for assuming I would endure it forever? He choked. because I thought staying silent would keep everything together. I shook my head. Silence only preserves the problem. It doesn't keep the person. He bowed his head and didn't argue. As he stood up to leave, I said one final thing, not to hold him back, but to close the book. Michael, some families break apart not because of an outsider, but because the people inside don't know how to protect each other. He stood still for a few seconds, then nodded and walked out. The door clicked shut very gently, so gently that I knew this chapter was definitively over. A few days later, I received a text from Chloe. Just one short line. If you had stayed quiet just a little bit longer back then, maybe things would have been different. I stared at the words for a long time. Then I replied, if you had stopped earlier back then, things wouldn't have gone this far. Read. No reply. That night, I stood on my balcony, looking down at the illuminated city. The traffic flowed, people kept living. No one stops because a family shatters. And I suddenly understood. Life doesn't wait for you to fix your mistakes before it moves on. It just keeps going. Whoever keeps up, lives on. Whoever stands still must suffer the void they created themselves. I turned back inside, closed the door, and turned on the lights. Tomorrow, I still had a lot of work to do. And this time, it wasn't to endure. It was to live. My life afterward wasn't particularly extraordinary. There were no dramatic makeovers, no wild freedom parties. Just days that passed by, feeling significantly lighter. In the mornings, I woke up a little earlier to make breakfast for my child. No rushing, no frustration. I dropped them off at school, standing at the gate watching them run into class, my heart feeling strangely settled. Previously, even when I was married, I never had this feeling. Back then, I always carried a vague anxiety, as if the moment I turned my back, something terrible would happen behind me. Now, that feeling was gone. I went to a new job, similar field, but a completely different mindset. I no longer had to prove my competence just to be accepted, nor did I have to yield just to find peace. I did my job properly, said exactly what needed to be said, and left the office right on time. Some people looked at me with curiosity, some were wary, and some bluntly asked, "Aren't you afraid of getting a bad reputation?" I just smiled. A reputation for what? They hesitated. For blowing things out of proportion. I didn't answer right away. I thought for a moment and said, if defending my boundaries is called blowing things out of proportion, then I'd rather have that reputation. The person went silent. And as for me, I stopped caring. Meanwhile, the fallout continued to spread slowly but unstoppably. Michael was called in for supplemental questioning multiple times. The company didn't fire him immediately, but he was stripped of all key responsibilities. No one said it directly, but everyone understood. Once trust is lost, it cannot be regained. He rarely showed his face, spoke little, and avoided making eye contact. I bumped into him once in the lobby of a corporate building downtown. He stopped me. "Do you ever have regrets?" he asked. I looked at him and answered truthfully. "Yes, I regret not stopping this sooner." He lowered his head and said nothing. As for Chloe, she began to feel very clearly what it meant to be left behind. No more friends gathering around her, no more checking in phone calls, no more people praising the brilliant young CEO. People didn't curse her out, they just stayed far away. I heard a rumor that Chloe tried to apply for a job at a smaller startup. When they asked her why she left her previous position, she remained silent, and that silence alone was enough for them to understand. When a reputation collapses, it doesn't happen with a loud crash. It falls apart piece by piece, very slowly, and very painfully. Eleanor aged visibly. No more criticizing remarks, no more scrutinizing glares. She lived a closed-off life, rarely going out, rarely speaking to anyone. Perhaps for the first time in her life, she realized that power within a family is not something that lasts forever. One day, she actually called me. Her voice was frail. "Are you doing okay these days?" "I'm fine," I replied. She was silent for a very long time before saying, "I was unfair to you back then." I closed my eyes, not out of pain, but because of a very complex emotion that was hard to name. The past is the past, I said. I don't want to bring it up again. She said, yeah, well, I suppose everyone has to pay their dues. I hung up, feeling lighter, but without any sense of victory, because I understood that there are some lessons people only learn when they have absolutely no one left to shield them. That evening, I sat beside my child, helping them with their homework. They looked up and asked a very innocent question. Mommy, why aren't you sad anymore? I paused, then smiled. Because Mommy knows she didn't do anything wrong. My child nodded and went back to their notebook. I watched them for a long time. I knew this was exactly why I had to stand up. Not to win or lose, but so my child could grow up knowing that silence is not the only way to live. That night, I wrote a single sentence in my journal. Not for anyone else, but for myself. Some families are only peaceful when one person endures everything. But that is not a family worth keeping. I closed the journal. Outside, Seattle was still bustling. But inside my small home, everything was perfectly still. And I knew that from here on out, whatever happened would no longer be a tragedy, but the natural consequence of the choices each person had made. I received a call from Chloe very late one night. Not a text message, not her usual screaming voice, but a long, dead silence on the line. When I answered, there was only the sound of heavy, jagged breathing, as if she had to gather every ounce of her courage just to dial my number. Finally, Chloe spoke. I don't have anyone else left to call. I didn't say anything. I didn't hang up. I just sat quietly and listened. I've been thinking a lot, she continued, her voice incredibly hoarse. I thought, if I had just been a little less greedy back then, a little less competitive, maybe things wouldn't have ended up like this. I looked out the window. The city at night was still brightly lit. People were still living their lives. Only those who stand still feel like the world has abandoned them. What do you want? I asked. Chloe was silent for a very long time. Something very small. I want you to say one sentence to them for me. I let out a soft laugh. Not a mocking laugh, just a sad one. What do you want me to say? I asked. That you aren't a bad person? That I just made a mistake. I closed my eyes. There are some sentences that, if spoken earlier, could save a person, but when they arrive too late, they are merely a plea to mitigate the consequences. Chloe, I said slowly, you aren't inherently evil, but you did something wrong. And that wrong doesn't just disappear because you regret it. The person on the other end of the line burst into tears. Do you hate me that much? She asked. I shook my head, even though I knew she couldn't see me. I don't hate you. I just refuse to be the one covering for you anymore. She went silent. Can you ever forgive me? Chloe asked. Her voice this time was very genuine. No acting, no screaming. I thought about it for a long time. It wasn't an easy question. I can forgive, I said. But forgiving doesn't mean erasing the consequences, and it definitely doesn't mean things go back to the way they were. Chloe sobbed. So it really is completely over, isn't it? I answered, my voice very light. It's been over for a long time. You're just finally willing to see it. The call ended in silence. A few days later, Michael sought me out. This time, he didn't stand outside my door. He asked to meet at a small, unassuming coffee shop. Not luxurious, not crowded, just quiet enough to say the final words that needed to be said. He had lost a lot of weight. His eyes were tired. He wasn't avoiding my gaze anymore. He didn't come to ask for me back. He said so immediately. I just wanted to apologize properly. I nodded. Go ahead. I chose to stay silent, Michael said. I thought silence would save the house, save you, save the family. He offered a bitter smile. In the end, I lost everything. I looked at him. You didn't lose everything. You just returned the things you didn't know how to protect. He bowed his head for a long time. Do you ever think, if I had stood by your side back then? He asked. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, if you had stood by my side back then, we wouldn't be sitting here right now. He fell silent. And I knew he understood. Before leaving, he asked one final question. Are you happy? I smiled. I am at peace. He nodded and didn't ask anything else. That evening, I went home early. I cooked a simple dinner. My child ate happily, chattering away about things that happened at school. I listened, smiling and nodding. When my child fell asleep, I sat alone for a long time. I thought about Chloe, about Michael, about Eleanor. I didn't curse anyone, nor did I wish for them to suffer more. I just understood one thing very clearly. Some apologies do not arrive to salvage a situation. They arrive simply so the person saying them feels less guilty, and I have no obligation to turn back, just to soothe someone else's remorse. I closed my journal and turned off the lamp. Tomorrow, I still have to keep living, and this time, I am living for myself and for my child. Things didn't happen in a rapid-fire sequence after that. No more major incidents, no new shocks. Life, once it has taken all it needs to take, usually returns a sense of quiet. Chloe accepted a plea deal and cooperated with the investigation. She stopped resisting, stopped playing the victim. She finally had to face what she had been dodging. I heard that during her final deposition, it took her a long time to sign her name. Her hands shook so much she had to ask for a new pen twice. After she signed, she cried. Not because she was scared, but because for the first time in her life, she understood the feeling of having no one step in to take the fall for her. Eleanor didn't call me anymore. Perhaps she finally understood that when relationships fracture too deeply, silence is the ultimate form of respect. Michael transferred to a different company. No one forced him to. He chose to leave. An acquaintance told me that the day before he left, he stood for a long time in the corporate parking lot, staring up at his old office building. Then he turned his back and walked away without looking over his shoulder. He finally understood, but he understood too late. As for me, life gradually returned to the very ordinary things. I switched to a different job, less pressure, but enough to provide for me and my child. I no longer stayed up late, stressing over who I had to deal with the next day, or agonizing over what to say to please people. I only thought about what my child needed, and how to live a life that was honorable to myself. One afternoon, I took my child for a walk in a nearby park. They ran ahead of me, laughing loudly. I watched them, my heart feeling incredibly light. I suddenly realized I had walked through a very long chapter of life just to learn how to stand up straight. My child turned back and asked me, "Mommy, when I grow up, do I have to hold things in as much as you used to?" I knelt down, adjusted the little bow in their hair, and answered very slowly, "No. If you live a good, honest life, you never have to hold things in just to be allowed to stay." My child nodded and ran off again. That night, I opened my old journal, the place where I used to write down all my frustrations and grievances from years ago. I flipped to the very last page and wrote one final sentence. A closure for myself. Some families break apart not because of an outsider, but because the people inside don't know how to protect each other. And some women only truly begin to live when they dare to walk away from the place that always forced them to remain silent. I closed the journal, turned off the light, and fell into a very, very deep sleep. The next morning, I woke up, brewed coffee, and opened the window. The Seattle morning sun poured in, incredibly gentle. The city was still noisy, but my heart was not. I knew that from today onward, I would never look back, not out of hatred, but because I had finally moved past it. And that is the most beautiful ending for someone who was once kicked out of a house, but managed to open another door for herself. A door that is sturdier and far more peaceful. The lesson: silence does not preserve a family. It only preserves the trauma. Forgiveness is to lighten your own heart, not an excuse to go back and endure more abuse. The strongest woman is not the one who defeats others, but the one who dares to choose peace. Takeaway from the story: this story is not about simple rights and wrongs. It is about boundaries. Some families only remain peaceful because one person is willing to suffer in silence. But that silence does not sustain happiness. It only prolongs pain. The woman in the story once thought that enduring was for the sake of the family, that silence was for the sake of her child, and that suffering was the price to keep a home. But in the end, she realized, no one has the right to force you to pay for the rest of your life for someone else's mistakes. Forgiveness is a beautiful choice, but forgiving does not mean returning to the place that broke you. And sometimes, walking away from a family that no longer respects you is not selfish. It is the only way to save yourself, and the only way to teach your children the right way to live. Life doesn't require you to defeat anyone else. It only requires that you do not defeat yourself. If you have listened to this story until these final minutes, perhaps you saw a reflection of yourself in it, or a reflection of someone you know. Please hit subscribe to the Sunset Stories channel to continue joining us for these gentle yet profound everyday stories, where every story is a lesson for the human heart after navigating life's many storms. Don't forget to like the video to support the channel and give us the motivation to keep telling these stories of resilience. Please leave a comment sharing your thoughts after listening. You never know, your story might help someone currently in a similar situation find the courage to keep moving forward. And if you found this story meaningful, please share the video to spread these positive messages to even more people. Thank you for listening.